Welcome to eCornell and our 5th episode of our One Health Around the World webinar series. My name is Dr. Steve Osofsky, and I have the privilege of being the director of the Cornell K. Lisa Yang Center for Wildlife Health. I want to thank you all so much for being here, and I want to thank Lisa Yang herself for her vision and her generosity. Before we dive into today's subject matter, which is the incredible work going on at the Janet L. Swanson Wildlife Hospital, I want to just make sure I give you an overview of what the center does here and around the world. I want to start with our vision. Our vision is a healthy future for wildlife, people, and planet. And our mission is about transforming science into impact through discovery, education, engagement, and policy to ensure a healthy future for wildlife and for the environment that supports us all. Why do we do all this? Because we need nature and nature needs us. And I want to explain that a bit. We need nature for all the incredibly important ecosystem goods and services that nature gives us, from clean air, clean water, climate mitigation services, pollination, all the things that sustain humanity. But when I say nature needs us, some people say, well, nature doesn't need us. Nature will just be fine. My point is nature needs us at this point in history to be better stewards, to think about natural resources as money in the bank where we try and live off of its interest instead of constantly taking withdrawals that will preclude future generations from benefiting from natural resources. I want to now talk about the different pillars that represent the work that the team under the center umbrella does around the world. We respond to the health threats to the survival of key species. Many of us provide landscape-level guidance on wildlife-compatible land use, policy, and practice. We may be providing that guidance to a state, to a country, to a body of the UN, depending on where the project is. We work to minimize disease transfer at the interface between wildlife, livestock, and people. And that really captures what we call the One Health approach. One Health is really about recognizing that our own health, the health of our wildlife, and the health of our livestock are all inextricably linked and, again, underpinned by environmental stewardship. And this holistic approach opens up a number of entry points to help us solve what would otherwise be often very intractable problems. Of course, we work to train the next generation of One Health and conservation leaders around the world, including training Cornell students, but also our partners overseas. And those first 4 pillars roll into what I call building new constituencies for wildlife conservation, our 5th pillar. And what I mean by that is in many of the places I know I work around the world, governments are strapped, and they often can't meet the basic needs of their citizens. And so biodiversity conservation in that context is understandably a luxury. But part of what we do is try and demonstrate how conservation can improve other sectors. For example, improve public health outcomes, improve prospects for sustainable agriculture or sustainable food systems. So I want to now turn our attention to the fantastic panel that we have today. And I want to focus on the Janet L. Swanson Wildlife Hospital. And I want to, first of all, thank Janet Swanson herself, whose generous gift has really helped make this hospital the leading institution that it is today. So I want to introduce our first speaker today, Dr. Sarah Child-Sanford, who is the section chief of the Janet L. Swanson Wildlife Hospital and associate professor of zoological medicine at Cornell University's College of Veterinary Medicine. Sarah is a clinician and researcher with a focus on things like shortening hospitalization times, improving clinical outcomes, and very importantly, maximizing releasability of hospitalized wildlife patients. Sarah, I want to turn it over to you and bring us into your world.
Thank you, Steve, for the introduction. And I know that the 3 of us are very excited to be here today to share some highlights of our work at the Swanson Wildlife Hospital. Cornell is actually one of only a few veterinary colleges in North America that have a hospital that's dedicated to wildlife. So this is a really unique feature of Cornell, and the hospital really complements the other fantastic wildlife groups here at the College of Veterinary Medicine. So in my part of this presentation, I will give sort of a broad overview of the Wildlife Hospital and the things that we do here and why those things are important. But before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that our work is not done in isolation. We rely on generous supporters like Janet Swanson, whose donations make our life-saving work possible, on participants, on partners who participate in all of the steps that an animal goes through from the time that it's found until it's released back to the wild, and on collaborators who share and support our passion for learning new things and for teaching. So thank you to all of those people. We are a busy hospital that provides veterinary care for native wild animals that are ill or injured. And we focus on medical and surgical decisions that have the best interest and welfare of that animal as the priority, and with the ultimate goal of releasing that animal back to the wild. But why is this important? What is the purpose of treating an individual wild animal? Does it have an effect on their population or that species conservation? And thankfully, research is increasingly showing that this is the case, that it does have an effect, but there's more to it than that. First and foremost, obviously, we want to address the pain and suffering of these poor, injured, and sick wild animals. They are truly helpless without an owner to advocate for them, and in most cases, without a chance of survival without intervention. And we want people to notice and to care about wildlife. So the connection that a person develops with an injured wild animal during that short amount of time is significant. And it can generate a deeper interest in wildlife and wildlife conservation. So we do definitely want to promote this compassion for wild animals by offering a place for people to bring these animals. Individual wild animals are a reflection of what's happening in their environment, and sometimes this can lead to the discovery of new things in a population. And this has happened on numerous occasions through our hospital, including in a case like this, an individual sharp-shinned hawk that led to the discovery of an emerging parasitic infection, followed by a population-level field research through our hospital. And finally, we need to prepare. Wildlife is only under rapidly growing pressure, and we need to find innovative solutions to address these wildlife health challenges. And I think advancing wildlife medicine and training wildlife specialists to meet these needs is essential in order for us to be successful in wildlife conservation. And also because wildlife health is very intertwined with environmental health and human health. So with a core team of 3 faculty veterinarians, 6 of the very best veterinary technicians, and also assisted by lots of awesome Cornell veterinary students, we treat thousands of wild animals every year. And over the past decade or so, our caseload has been steadily increasing every year, and 2025 was yet another record year for us. And we admitted over 2,700 patients to our hospital. But this caseload growth is not unique to our hospital. It's happening at wildlife centers and hospitals almost everywhere. And the reason for this is multifactorial, but it also includes an increased awareness that hospitals like ours exist due to the internet and social media, as well as an increased need of the animals as humans have more and more effects on wildlife and the environment. So what kind of animals do we see? Well, anything that's native to New York State, either permanently or transiently. And the majority of our caseload, over half of our caseload, are birds. And there's a tremendous diversity of avian species here in New York State. And the most common avian patient that we see in our hospital every year is the red-tailed hawk. Most of the rest of our patients are a wonderful diversity of mammal species. And then the remainder, about 5 to 10% of our caseload, are reptiles and amphibians, especially turtles in the warmer months of the year. Patients come to us from all across New York State. They arrive from multiple different sources, but by far, the majority of our patients come from members of the general public who find injured wildlife and from licensed wildlife rehabilitators. These are wonderful people who volunteer their time and resources and have a license in New York State in order to provide first aid and rehabilitation for wildlife. There are a tremendous diversity of reasons why animals present to our hospital. And we work hard to diagnose and treat these conditions. Many of these animals are in very critical condition when they arrive, and some of them don't survive or need to be humanely euthanized. But the majority of things that we see commonly are anthropogenic causes. Anthropogenic meaning human-related, either directly or indirectly. And of those anthropogenic causes, trauma is very common. Often this is being hit by a car or another vehicle of some kind. It can include entrapment or entanglement, like in fishing gear with the snapping turtle here. And entanglement can occur with a lot of different things, such as garden netting, soccer nets, barbed wire, trash, really anything that we put into the environment. Also, I think I might have skipped one. No, I didn't. So we have birds that accidentally hit windows very commonly. Also, small animals that are attacked by domestic predators, such as cats that are outside or dogs, and a lot of different reasons for trauma. Sometimes it's toxins that humans put into the environment. We often hear about lead toxicity from ammunition and fishing gear, but another common toxin is anticoagulant rodenticide. This is a poison that's used to kill rodents by causing them to bleed to death. And it can also affect other animals that then eat those rodents, such as this young bald eagle that required a blood transfusion to save its life. We see a variety of infectious diseases, including disease outbreaks, such as the current highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreak that affects a lot of our patients this time of year and requires us to wear this protective equipment like in this photo. What kind of care do we provide for these animals? Well, any type of care that your pet can receive when you take it to the veterinarian, we can provide for wildlife. Everything from basic veterinary care up to advanced diagnostics and procedures. So for example, we can often fix broken bones in birds using advanced surgical techniques that give them the best possible chance of return to full function so that then they can be released back to the wild. We are a full-service hospital. We can do almost everything that we need within our own walls. But we're very fortunate to also have access to the incredible veterinary specialists and state-of-the-art equipment at the Cornell University Hospital for Animals and Animal Health Diagnostic Center that allow us to do some pretty advanced and innovative things for our patient care. And as a veterinary hospital, we focus on medicine and surgery for wildlife patients. We do not perform wildlife rehabilitation. Instead, we partner with a fantastic network of wildlife rehabilitators across New York State who take these patients and then finish out any care they need and then get them in excellent shape for release back to the wild. So all of these thousands of individual animals that we admit to our hospitals, or hundreds of thousands across the United States, or even millions around the world that are rescued and cared for each and every year, are a tremendous source of valuable information. These individual patients can teach us how to do what we do better to improve our practice of wildlife medicine that increases the success of our treatments, that shortens hospitalization times for our patients, that improves their survival after they're released back to the wild. And one example of this is in this photo. It's a research project that we've been working on for a few years, and it's in its final stages. And it addresses an old question about how to manage owls with eye injuries. Owls have very large eyes that take up the majority of their skull. So when an owl is hit by a car, for example, they often sustain damage to their eyes. Sometimes this is to both eyes, sometimes it's to one eye. And because nocturnal owls use their incredible hearing to locate and capture prey, some people believe that visual compromise or even loss of an eye is okay, and that bird can be released back to the wild. Some people don't agree with this, and they either have these owls euthanized or they are put in a captive setting for the rest of their life. So, which course of action is correct? Our study aims to help answer this question, and we're studying two nocturnal owl species, great horned owls and barred owls. We have a group of owls with 2 normal perfect eyes and a group that have had to have one of their eyes removed for medical reasons and the other eye that is in normal shape. And then we followed these owls after they're released with satellite transmitters to see how they do. And this research will help to inform medical and rehabilitation protocols for nocturnal owls with eye injuries. And this is a really common problem that we see. And so it has the potential to really impact the lives of many owls. And as I mentioned, each individual patient is a reflection of what's happening in its population and in its environment. And so being vigilant and noticing what's happening with these individual animals can lead to the discovery of interesting things, such as how a disease is changing over time, or the discovery of a new disease. And one example of this, it happened with the porcupines in our hospital, and we do see a lot of porcupines. And a few years ago, we were noticing porcupines with increasingly having respiratory disease, and that included a lot of nasal discharge. And so we thought maybe it was something contagious. We dug a little deeper with the help of the incredible virologists and molecular diagnosticians at Cornell's Animal Health Diagnostics Center, and we found a new virus that had recently been discovered but not yet reported in porcupines. And this new virus proceeded to spread across New York State and across the Northeast, including New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine, causing tremendous illness and death in porcupines. And we still see this disease today. But another thing that's very concerning about this disease is that the virus does not behave like it's supposed to. So normally an adenovirus is species specific. So for example, the dog adenovirus may infect very closely related species such as coyotes, foxes, and wolves, but that's pretty much as far as it goes. In the skunk adenovirus 1, which is this new virus that we found, this virus has been found in these species so far, many of which are not very closely related, including the porcupine, which is a rodent. And so it raises the question, how might this virus be affecting other species of free-ranging wildlife? So further research at Cornell and with collaborators has made progress in characterizing this emerging disease in porcupines, but also laying the groundwork for further research to better understand how this virus might be impacting free-ranging wildlife populations beyond porcupines. Another thing that is really important about these individual animals is that they are important for teaching. We have the opportunity to teach, which is a privilege we enjoy, but it's also necessary in order to shape the future of wildlife health. There is an increasing veterinary student interest in the field of wildlife health. So our hospital offers an inclusive and supportive learning environment for whatever level of interest that students may have in helping wildlife, no matter what career path they want to be on. And so in our hospital, students learn about veterinary care for native wildlife while also practicing skills that are applicable to any area of veterinary medicine, including critical thinking, technical skills, and clinical reasoning. And they learn to apply the knowledge on domestic animals that they've learned in the veterinary curriculum and adapt that knowledge to working with wildlife, while also learning about common wildlife diseases and current conservation topics. And we're so lucky to have student enthusiasm and energy around us all of the time, including the 20 to 30 veterinary students that work at the hospital, as well as the coursework that we offer, including a clinical rotation, and even programs for veterinary technician students. And all of these students are doing things, hands-on learning that teaches them about wildlife, but also prepares them as veterinarians and technicians in general. Some of these students and young veterinarians also want to specialize in wildlife as their career. And specialization takes a lot of experience and advanced training, But despite this increased interest, there's hardly any training programs for wildlife health in North America. So we set out to address this disparity by creating 2 specialty training programs for wildlife health at Cornell, which brought together a lot of the fantastic wildlife groups that we have in the College of Veterinary Medicine. The first of these programs is a wildlife internship program. This is a 1-year program designed to provide early career veterinarians with a solid foundation to either get a job working with wildlife or to pursue further specialty training. The core of this program is a rigorous wildlife medicine training in our hospital, working with native wildlife and actually seeing and treating their diseases. But this experience in the hospital is complemented by wildlife health experiences outside of the hospital. And these include working with population health management through Cornell's partnership with our New York State Wildlife Agency, with our wildlife pathology service, where they learn about investigating wildlife mortality, and with our aquatic animal health program that investigates fish health and disease in wild fish and aquaculture systems. And this program is a versatile and realistic experience for our interns that prepares them for a future career in wildlife health. And one example of how this works well, whoops, sorry about that, fast with the clicker, is this right here. So our interns have the opportunity to work with free-ranging bobcats in our hospital. And these are not easy patients to work with. They learn about the diseases that wild bobcats have. They also administer and monitor anesthesia and learn about how to safely work with these dangerous animals in a hospital setting. So our interns got the opportunity to actually put this to the test in a field experience where they worked on a Cornell-based project monitoring health of wild bobcats in New York State. And they contributed valuable skills to this project in that they helped with successful sample collection and data collection. They were able to help keep these animals safe and healthy under anesthesia and also make sure the environment was safe for the humans working with these animals. So this internship, as I mentioned, brought together a lot of the wonderful wildlife groups and expertise that we have here at Cornell and the College of Veterinary Medicine. And it helped us realize that we have the ability to excel at training specialists and future leaders in the field of wildlife health. So then next we created a wildlife residency program, and which has been generously funded by the K. Lisa Yang Center for Wildlife Health. And this is a 4-year program with the first 3 years that are very similar to the internship program, and a 4th year that it completes a Master of Professional Studies in the section of Natural Resources in Cornell's Ashley School. Additionally, this is one of only 3 residency programs in North America that is approved by the American College of Zoological Medicine, which is the specialty organization for wildlife health. So our trainees will be well prepared and well equipped, no matter where their career in wildlife may take them, to provide the best medicine and decisions about the health of wild animals. And at the heart of all of this, no matter how big the impact, how much work it takes, or how many people involved, is that individual wild animal patient. And I know I speak for us and all of our staff at the Wildlife Hospital that it is such an honor for us to be able to work with these amazing creatures every day.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing such a great overview and by also introducing the residency program, because our next speaker is, of course, our inaugural Cornell K. Lisa Yang resident in wildlife population health, Taylor Hefts. Taylor, I'm going to say a little bit about you and then turn it over to you. So you came to us already being obviously a veterinarian and an experienced public health professional with dedication to advancing the health, welfare, and conservation of free-ranging wildlife through that One Health lens that we spoke about. So I'm really excited to hear about some of the things that you've been getting out of this new program. So over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for having me here today. I'm really excited to talk about my experiences so far in this residency program and how these experiences are preparing me for my future career goal of becoming a free-ranging wildlife veterinarian for a state fish and wildlife agency. So starting in the clinic, this is where I spend the majority of my time practicing a variety of clinical skills. So the image on the left, I'm working on a digit wound on a fox that's anesthetized. In the upper right, I'm placing a tube into a heron's trachea for anesthesia. And in the lower right image, I'm looking into the ear of a porcupine. And I get to practice a wide variety of clinical skills here in the hospital. And these skills are directly transferable to the work that I want to do in the field. So some examples include how to draw blood on different species, how to safely restrain them and examine them, and how to safely sedate and anesthetize them. But another really special part of working in the clinic is being able to work with students. So these are really enthusiastic students that love wildlife. And unfortunately, it's fairly common for students to become deterred from pursuing a career in wildlife medicine for a variety of reasons, many of which there are validity to. And I really view our role as mentors as being able to help them navigate those challenges rather than deter them from pursuing the field. So I would say that's one of the most rewarding parts of being in the clinic. Moving on to necropsy experience. So necropsies are the animal version of an autopsy. And that's when you examine a deceased animal and its organ systems to look for evidence of disease or injury and what may have led to their death. And I get to spend quite a bit of time with Cornell's pathologists, Dr. Hitchner and Dr. Buckles, learning how to perform necropsies on a variety of species and identify what diseases look like in these different species. And the image on the left is actually my intern mate, Dr. Julia Udding, and I performing necropsies on fish. And this was performed with Dr. Rod Getchell. And I don't personally have a ton of experience with fish necropsy, so this was very helpful to learn about normal anatomy and what diseases can look like in fish. So this is obviously a very important skill to have if you think about free-ranging wildlife veterinarians that respond to like disease die-off events. Moving into my time with the Cornell Wildlife Health Lab, which I've spent quite a bit of time with them so far. They are a partnership with the Department of Environmental Conservation on the New York State Wildlife Health Program. And I've gotten to participate in numerous field experiences with them so far, all that have been very helpful. So I've gotten to participate in a grassland bird breeding survey, a box turtle health survey, and an oral rabies vaccination monitoring program. So that last one is work being performed under the USDA that I got to help with, and it's part of a larger rabies management program where they disperse oral rabies vaccine baits that animals then consume. And several weeks later, they will attempt to recapture them and draw their blood to look for evidence of antibodies, which would indicate that the vaccine was effective. And so the image on the lower left is the type of trap we'll use. And I learned that raccoons really love marshmallows. So those are marshmallows in the trap, and you kind of trail them into the trap so that they'll walk in and it'll close behind them. And then the image on the right is me with a USDA employee showing me how to use the metal instrument to safely restrain a fox in the back of that trap so that I can safely inject it with a sedative medication. So they will sometimes catch animals other than raccoons, but if they are animals that are susceptible to rabies, they'll still move forward with the procedure of testing them. But wildlife veterinarians are not always in the field, so they play very important other roles and contribute to public education and outreach and provide clinical expertise and support and resources to wildlife professionals like biologists and wildlife rehabilitators. So the image on the right is a disease fact sheet that I got to help create on New World screwworm, and it's one of many available on the Wildlife Health Lab website. So this was a really good experience in learning how to take the scientific and medical knowledge and translate it into something that's more digestible for the public so they can learn about diseases that they should be aware of. I've also gotten to help formulate some euthanasia protocols and compile resources for a website that wildlife rehabilitators will use. But back to the field. So this image is from a whale necropsy that I got to participate in this month. This image is from the Marine Mammals Stranding Center Instagram, and I wanted to include the caption on the right, not only because it has very helpful information, but also to maintain full context of the image. And this animal was found deceased, unfortunately, on the bow of a ship and was brought to this location for necropsy. Fin whales are endangered species, and they're the second largest species of whale. And so this was a really important and educational experience for myself. And this work was done in collaboration with the Atlantic Marine Conservation Society. And the goal of this was to thoroughly examine this animal, and that requires a large coordinated effort. And so that's to examine the animal, but also because we need to focus on human safety as well. So we use really large machinery, and we have sharp instruments. So it requires a lot of coordination to be able to do this safely and efficiently. And we did end up finding evidence of blunt force trauma to the right side of the animal. And we did collect many samples to bring back to Cornell so that they could be examined by veterinary pathologists to look for evidence of disease or injury when examined under a microscope. This is the team that got to attend the necropsy with Dr. Jennifer Bloodgood in the middle. She's the veterinarian for the Wildlife Health Lab and one of my main mentors. And we also got to bring veterinary students and our anatomic pathology resident, Arthur. And it's always just very nice to bring a diverse group of people and learn from each other's experiences. And I'm just really grateful that we were invited to this. Lastly, I just wanted to talk a bit about my residency research project. So this is a project I'll be involved in for the remainder of my residency, and it involves a health assessment of American martens in the Adirondacks. So these animals are already being live trapped, anesthetized, and having GPS collars placed on them by Dr. Stacy McNulty and Dr. Paul Jensen up at the SUNY ESF Newcomb campus, right in the middle of the Adirondacks. And that's what the image on the right is depicting. It's an anesthetized marten with a GPS collar placed on it. And this is from the campus's Instagram. And we are adding on a health component to it where we are collecting blood samples and oral swabs to look for diseases like avian influenza, distemper, and COVID, as well as exposure to environmental contaminants like lead and rodenticides. And this will help us understand if this population is being impacted by any of those things that I've mentioned, but it can also help inform management decisions made by the Department of Environmental Conservation. So it's been really fantastic working with this team. They're extremely experienced. I've learned a lot about the ecology of this region, trapping, and the behavior of American martens. And when drawing blood proved to be challenging because these animals are really small and have very small vessels, we were able to develop some models for them to practice on and some videos using cadavers to show them the anatomy of their vessels. So just being able to see the really helpful collaborative partnership that can exist between wildlife professionals and veterinarians has been very amazing to see, and I'm very excited to continue work with this team and see what else will happen in my residency.
Fantastic. Taylor, thank you so much for giving us some insights into the experiences you're already having. It's
Absolutely.
very exciting. So I want to introduce our last speaker today, Dr. Cynthia Hoff-Dennis, who's a wildlife veterinarian and assistant clinical professor at our College of Veterinary Medicine. Dr. Hoff-Dennis divides her time between treating wildlife patients, teaching in the clinic, and pursuing her research interests. I think, Cindy, you're not just going to tell us about some of the cases you've seen, but I think you're also going to tell us a bit about how we can prevent some of these situations that are impacting our wildlife in the first place.
That's correct, Steve.
Over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here today because I get the chance to do exactly that. I enjoy discussing some of the cases we see in our wildlife hospital, whether it's with students or with the audience here today, and so that's what I'll do. As you can already determine, as you've heard from my two colleagues here, our hospital is a very different kind of veterinary facility. The Janet Swanson Wildlife Hospital is very special because we see a unique variety of patients. These patients challenge us in a variety of ways, like this beaver here, and I'll provide some examples as we work through some of our patients. So this beaver here is happily chewing on a piece of sweet potato, and you can see in the bowl in front of the beaver that there are sweet potato, squash, and lettuce, all food items that you can probably drive down to your grocery store and purchase, and we can provide these in the hospital. However, what you don't see, and what is unique about this species, is that they eat a large amount of browse. And browse for us may be something like willow branches or poplar branches. And these beavers eat a large amount of this type of food in the hospital, and they need to stay healthy. So if you were to walk down to the grocery store and ask them for a handful of browse, they may look at you a little bit strangely. So this is just one example of a variety of the challenge to provide food for our patients just on a daily basis in the hospital. And we know, and we've discussed, that these patients represent a small piece of our larger ecosystem that they've come from. And I use this example here of this juvenile coyote because this is not a small animal. It may be a small piece of its environment, but in the hospital, it's quite a presence. And it's an animal that we have to treat with some respect. As you can imagine, these are not patients that would like to be around us on a daily basis, and this animal presents to us a challenge to handle them appropriately, safely for the staff as well as the patient, and make sure that we are well trained and well able to provide appropriate care. So now I will get into some very specific cases, and I'll talk my way through a little bit of their natural history, a little bit of the challenge that they present to us in the hospital to provide appropriate care, and a little bit of why they came to us. And then, yes, Steve, of course, I will provide a little bit about what you might be able to do to mitigate some of the challenges that our wildlife are facing in each of these very specific examples. So first, we meet a male hooded warbler. So this beautiful bird here is small. To give you some indication of how small, it's only about 5 inches long from the tip of its beak to the tip of its tail. And that's about the size of, today's everyday cell phone face. You're walking around with it in your pocket probably right now. And it's only about 10 grams in weight. And that's about the size of a AA battery. So if you go and pick up a AA battery and then imagine handling a bird like that in hospital in order to treat it for the care that it needs, you get some indication of what we do on a daily basis. So this particular bird is a migratory species. It flies a long distance, and in its natural habitat, it's an insectivore. So that means it eats insects. And in the hospital, that means we have to provide it with a large number of insects. And that can be challenging, especially for a species like this that's known to hunt in a very unique pattern, which is called hawking. So they'll stand on the branches or on the ground or on some leaves, and they'll jump up into the air and flutter up and grab some insects right out of the air. That kind of behavior and pattern might be difficult for us to provide in a hospital setting. So we need to watch these patients very carefully to make sure that they eat enough food, that they maintain weight, and that they thrive so that they can heal, because they're all injured when they come to us for some reason or another. This particular hooded warbler has a story to tell. So this bird was a window strike. We know that window strikes cause the death of over 1 billion birds every year based on this recent study published in the Condor, and that's a huge number. And you may think that we're able to blame maybe large glass high-rises in the center of cities and things like that for these types of injuries, but we're not. About half of these happen on residential properties. So maybe like your house or mine or your neighbors, these birds are striking windows of just an everyday house. And many of these birds are migratory, like the warbler in the previous slide, or like this chimney swift here in this slide, and they're often all in decline. So they're birds that we should be paying a lot of attention to. And what do we see in the hospital when a patient presents after a window strike? We may see something like head trauma. And for us, an example of that for you here on the slide is the bottom picture with a sharp-shinned hawk resting on a towel. If you've ever seen or met any of these birds in the wild, they're very fast. They hunt on the wing. They're very small raptors. And in the hospital, they don't like to see us. They don't like to interact. So this bird, in the presence of a human, would be exhibiting some stress. It would be standing, staring at us. Its wings would probably be out to the side. It would be ready to escape. But in the presence of head trauma, which is essentially a terrible headache or concussion, this bird is resting very quietly, looking at us, aware, but not responsive. And that's abnormal. So we know from the outside this bird is injured and requires care. And that's just because we know its natural history and behavior. We may also see ocular or eye trauma in our patients. And as I discussed, many of these patients are long migratory species that fly long distances, that eat small objects like flying insects. They need their eyes to see. And so eye trauma can be devastating to a patient like this and make an animal not releasable or not be able to thrive in the wild. And then the other picture here is an example. This is a northern flicker, and this is an example of a beak injury from a window strike. So you can see in the top of the image by the flicker's beak that the upper beak has been broken off. And what's important to know and consider about the natural history of this species is that all wildlife is a certain shape for a certain reason, right? And this flicker has a beak fracture. They use their beaks to eat, whether that's out of a tree or out of the ground to pick up insects or grubs or things like that. So this patient will likely need to be observed eating and in rehabilitation for a period of time to make sure that that beak is going to be sufficient for it to thrive in the wild. It's very likely it will not grow back completely normally, so we just need to make sure that it's going to be okay. And this could also be a small but devastating injury. But some of these injuries aren't quite as obvious, and this is where we come in as a hospital, and we need to look a little bit deeper into the patients. So some of our patients who strike windows suffer from broken bones. This is an example here. We have a belted kingfisher under anesthesia so that we can get appropriate straight diagnostic radiographs or x-rays of the patient. And the picture on the right side there of your screen is an x-ray. And so this x-ray is showing you an injury of a bone called the coracoid, which is a very important bone in the shoulder for flight for a bird. And so those two yellow circles are representing the coracoids of both of the shoulders of a bird. And an x-ray is flipped to you on the screen. So the bird's left shoulder is on your right, and the bird's right shoulder is on your left. So the bird's left coracoid on the right side of your screen, that right oval there, that is a broken coracoid. It's in several pieces. You can kind of see that it doesn't look quite the same as the other side. Unfortunately, this bone is injured to the extent that it is not repairable, and this patient will never be able to fly. Flight is very important for most birds, as you all know, and this injury is something that would lead to the humane euthanasia of this patient. So what can you do to help some of these patients and mitigate window strikes of maybe some warblers or the scarlet tanager here? We can have you put something very simple. So window decals, they come in a variety of shapes and sizes. They can look pretty on your window, so patterns of circles and longitudinal lines or shapes of birds. Window decals on your window break up the reflection that the birds see on the window and allows them to visualize the window so they don't strike it. And important to know, this is something you can do in your own backyard, maybe your sliding screen door, especially if you have a bird feeder out back. All right, so the next adorable patient we will meet here is already asleep for you to see, but this is an eastern chipmunk. I'm sure you've seen these in your own backyard, running around wood piles, running underneath the fences. These are very small, charismatic rodents. They tend to forage in your backyard, and they tend to spend a lot of time in residential areas, which means they get into trouble with the things we leave hanging around. And this is a perfect example of this. So entanglements are reported in marine mammals and in marine life pretty regularly and cause mortality. However, they also happen in our own backyards, and this chipmunk is a good example of that. It was tangled up in some garden netting. We put it under anesthesia as soon as it came into the hospital because they are very fast. And this little guy kept trying to get out of the netting even as he was in our hands. So we did have to make sure that he was nice and cooperative. You can see us cutting the netting away from his neck in that bottom image there. This chipmunk did great. So this looks like a terrible image, but this was actually a very happy story in the end, and this patient was survived to release. But it's not just with chipmunks, and not all the stories are happy endings. So we have here on this slide an example of a not so happy ending. So the robin on the left side of the slide here has a traumatic amputation of the joint akin to your ankle joint here. And this bird was found dangling from a bush by a clear piece of line. Unfortunately, this kind of injury here, this bird cannot live with one leg in the wild, and this injury did end in this bird's humane euthanasia in hospital because of the devastation it caused. On the right is a happier story. This is a juvenile starling. And you can see it's a baby because it has little tufts of feathers coming off the top of its head. And this guy was found hanging from the roof of a barn by the filament that you see tangled around his left leg there. And that ended well, but that was because intervention happened very quickly. Somebody saw this occur and saw the bird dangling and then brought it to us for care. Fishing entanglement, which was mentioned previously, I just thought this was a very good example to kind of drive it home how devastating this can be. This is a Canada goose that was entangled in fishing line and also had a hook through its foot. You can see the damage caused by the line in both of the legs. There's a portion just above the foot where there's kind of pinching of the skin. So this line tightens over time as the bird tries to move or get away or live its normal life. And this causes damage to muscles and tendons and nerves, and if you wait long enough, to the bone itself. And these are patients that would succumb to their illnesses and injuries in the wild if care was not sought. Even with some cases like this that are this devastating, these patients often require euthanasia because we cannot save the ability to move the legs or move the feet. This patient had a happy ending, but I just wanted to show you how terrible this can be, because I think we can do something about it. So this turtle here was also caught by another fishing hook here. And that brings up a good point, I think. If you are a recreational fisher person and you're out there and you get a hook stuck in a tree, or you bycatch something like a turtle, do something about it. Maybe bring the turtle to Wildlife Hospital if it ends up with a hook in its mouth like this. If you're walking around for a hike, or you're just enjoying some time in nature and you see strings in bushes or in trees hanging from the sides of buildings, remove those. Maybe bring a little bag with you, a reusable shopping bag perhaps, and you can toss those filaments into that bag to make sure nobody gets tangled up with them. So our next patient here, we'll keep rolling through, is an adorable American robin. And this is a juvenile robin. Robins are very commonly found in your own backyard. You probably see them as a harbinger of spring. They're out there eating worms. In the wintertime, they can be found in large flocks in trees and roost in flocks of about 250,000 birds, which is impressive. They're very sociable, and they are also, in this particular example, they're found around our houses frequently, which means that they often can come in contact with cats. This robin here is providing you with an example of what a cat-caught bird can look like. And we know that cat-caught or cat interactions are the second greatest cause of avian mortality in a recent study done at the Wildlife Center of Virginia. And we see the same thing in our hospital. This robin here has a very unusual looking growth underneath its chin and then in front of its left leg, and those are bubbles of air. And those air bubbles are an indication that the cat punctured the bird's respiratory system, and there's air leaking underneath its skin. This is important because it's very challenging for this patient to eat, to get around, but also because it's evidence of a deeper seated infection. So the cat's tooth went into the bird's body with the bacteria it carried, and these are challenging cases to treat because these deeper infections can be devastating. But it's not just birds. Of course, we know that small mammals and even snakes can be caught by cats too. Really anything in your backyard that's not fast enough to get away, because we know cats are natural predators. They're very good at what they do. And so I think the message to take home here from these presentations is that perhaps we could think of a different way to enrich our cats. Instead of letting them out into the outdoors, maybe think about a catio or a cat patio so that they can see what's happening in the wild but not attack some of these vulnerable species, or perhaps a leash walk, as challenging as I know that can be with some cats, but it's a better controlled situation, and then we don't have these animals being injured, brought to us, or even dying in the wild, which I'm sure many of them do. Alrighty, our second to last case here is a northern harrier. This species right here is a medium-sized raptor, just a little bit smaller than kind of the average red-tailed hawk you may see on a normal basis. These species are very impressive aerial predators. This is a male because it's a steely blue-gray color. And they hunt in grasslands and wetland areas that are highly privileged sites that are very important for a variety of other species' well-being. They are ground roosting birds, and they nest on the ground too. and they're unfortunately in decline. So the North American Bird Breeding Survey has found that they have declined by about 30% from 1966 to 2019. This particular patient presented to us found just down, that's a common presentation that we get, a description. It didn't have any obvious injuries or fractures, and we found on basic exam that the bird was severely anemic. So, based on its diet of rodents and its severe anemia, we concluded on diagnostics that it was exposed to anticoagulant rodenticides. We've discussed these previously in this talk with you today, but they're toxins targeted to mice and rats, and they can cause secondary intoxications to the birds of prey that eat those mice or rats that have eaten the bait. And so that's what we mean by secondary intoxication. And it is common. We've done a study out of our hospital. Over half of our local red-tailed hawks have anticoagulants in their system. And the anticoagulant rodenticides that they have in their system are second generation, which is a classification by the EPA. We know that they're dangerous because they last a longer time in soft tissues, and we know that they can cause clinical signs in our birds, like this red-tailed hawk here receiving a blood transfusion for its severe anemia. But what's concerning about this northern harrier that we saw earlier is that that's a privileged site. This is not a bird that hunts around buildings or close to structures. This is in the grasslands and wetlands. So these rodenticides are making their way out into these larger landscapes. So I think we can be more responsible about this. I think we can consider prevention and making sure that we try other ways to mitigate rats and mice in our house. And that might be something like sealing up areas that we know they may be coming in, or being clean and tidy about food or water sources that they might be utilizing inside of the house, or even thinking about live traps. So the last patient we'll talk about here is a snowy owl. It's the largest owl in North America by weight, and it spends its summers as far north as the Arctic Circle. They migrate and they come down towards us in the winter times, and they hunt on the wing similar to the harrier. They're also a very agile owl species, and they are also in decline. This owl here is the same as in the previous slide, and it was hit by a car. So vehicular collisions are common for us to see, and based on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service data, they are in the top 5 threats of birds in North America. And this bird required quite an advanced orthopedic procedure and rehabilitation afterwards, because it has a fracture in its wing, circled there in red, very close to its shoulder. And if you feel your shoulder and your upper arm, you would feel that there's a lot of muscle there. This is the humerus, and that is what was broken in this bird. So these advanced procedures and surgical procedures in patients like this often require advanced treatment afterwards. And this is one area that our hospital is striving to set standards of therapy for. So we've published a management protocol for early postoperative avian wing fractures, because we feel that some of these complicated injuries, or even just basic fractures and repair, can benefit from some techniques that are commonly used in small animal sports medicine, such as icing therapy or range of motion and early movement. This video that I have here is a slightly more advanced technique, and this is electrical stimulation of an eagle's wing that had an injury, a luxation or a dislocation of its elbow. And this eagle's wing required much more sensitive exercise in hospital. We were not able to let it exercise on its own initially, so that we could maintain the integrity of its muscle. So this is just a little bit of stimulus on the muscle, a little bit of electrode stimulus to allow it to bring its wing back into its body, so that when it was ready to exercise on its own, it was still strong and functioning. So this is just one area that we aim to establish better practices. We also, as was mentioned earlier, our goal is to train to a high standard of care, and we understand that capacity building is important. And one way we've recently focused on capacity building is through international collaborations. So recently we were invited by the conservation not-for-profit ELIFAM to present training materials at a training conference in Nanjing, China, that was co-hosted by the International Fund for Animal Welfare and the Hongshan Forest Zoo. And this was an excellent opportunity for us to highlight the expertise at the hospital and also collaborate internationally to promote animal welfare and wild animal care. Because we know that each individual animal is important. We've discussed this earlier. Every individual animal that we have come through our hospital is an indicator of their ecosystem health, as well as important in their own respect. I just presented to you several patients that are important for their own reasons. And we know as a team in our hospital that it takes a village, it takes a team to get a wild bird like this great horned owl back to the wild and thriving. And I would invite you, after hearing this webinar today, to join our team and to become stewards for the native wildlife in your own backyard too.
Cindy, thank you so much for those great examples and for making those connections between the individuals, the population, and the environment, and telling people what they can do, because obviously the fewer animals that end up in your hospital, the better. This has been fascinating, and we have some time to open this up for audience questions. So we're going to take some questions from the audience, and I guess, I'll start off just what keeps you going? I mean, this can be very, very challenging work. It can be emotionally draining. How do you get up every morning and say, okay, the glass is a half full? I mean, we all deal with this as people who handle patients, but I'm just curious what your personal strategies are for dealing with the challenges of the work. Maybe anyone can chime in.
I was going to say, personally, when I think about the difference of wildlife medicine, I think of animals that don't have an individual owner, like a cat or a dog. And I think for some people in the veterinary field, we feel it's our responsibility to be stewards for their health. And it's also in the veterinary oath to promote animal welfare and prevent suffering of animals. So I think even humane euthanasia is a great treatment for an animal that's in severe distress. So I think it's also part of our responsibility as veterinarians as much as it is a passion.
Oh, that's really helpful. You want to add to that, or?
Oh, I think that was excellent. I do. We talk a lot about the release process, but as Dr. Hoff mentioned in some of her cases, the outcome isn't always release. And so we do see some things that are quite sad and difficult to see, but I think we also recognize that it's our opportunity and our role to help these animals, even if the outcome is humane euthanasia, because without us and without that opportunity, they are left out in the wild to maybe have a slow death that is painful. So.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. We have a question from Art, who wants to know if the Swanson Wildlife Hospital has conducted other research related to post-release outcomes that inform decision-making.
I'll let you take that one.
Not as directly as the post-release survival of the owls, but yes, I think that's something we always think about with our patients, is what is the opportunity here to improve what we're doing. So most definitely there will be similar studies in the future that help to really inform sort of the tradition of the way things are done without evidence and provide evidence to support those decisions so we know what the correct one is.
Yeah. I mean, my understanding is you guys are on the cutting edge in terms of the rodenticide poisoning issue, where up until recently it's been very difficult, if not impossible, to diagnose this in a patient before they're dead, given the type of samples you've needed. But you're doing some research now to be able to do a bird-side test, is that right?
That's correct, yes. We have yet to have something that we can have in the hospital. We have to go off of our clinical index of suspicion and the diagnostics we can run, like the anemia in a patient, the kind of animal it is and what they might eat, and then know that they don't have maybe any injuries. We see no injuries on the patient, but we see a severe anemia. It's very likely to be a rodenticide. And we can test their liver, but testing the liver of an alive patient that has a bleeding disorder is a very risky thing to do. And so we are working to have a better idea of how to diagnose this in hospital. We've yet to come to a conclusion, but yes, we're certainly digging.
Yeah, no, that's important work.
Yep.
We have a question from Jessica, who identifies herself as a newly minted licensed wildlife rehabilitator. And her question is, if we run into a species that is threatened, who should we be sharing data with? And what does the relationship between wildlife rehabilitators and the Swanson Hospital in terms of covering the costs of care?
Yes, so threatened and endangered species need to be reported to your state's wildlife agency. So in New York State, that's the Department of Environmental Conservation. And we have actually worked with rehabilitators on some of our research studies, collecting information or data that they have. So we definitely let rehabilitators know when we have an opportunity for data collection in that way. As far as cost of care goes, when a wildlife rehabilitator brings a potentially releasable animal to us for care, there is no cost associated with that. And we receive, as I mentioned, a lot of our patients from wildlife rehabilitators because they're providing first aid and rehabilitation, but when medicine and surgery is needed, then we're available to do that.
Hence that mentioning of donors being important to the ongoing running of the hospital.
Absolutely. We, yes, the care is paid for in some way, but we don't charge people who bring us animals.
All right, we have another question from Morgan, who asks, what techniques or resources can wildlife control operators utilize to promote non-lethal, One Health-oriented solutions for their clients? I guess this is nuisance wildlife companies, they want to be responsible. What kind of advice can we give them?
That's an excellent question. Probably it's very broad, and I think that the rodenticide, of course, is probably the example that made them ask that question. Maybe, I think, mitigating and thinking of ways of preventing, in this example, rats and mice from coming into houses, especially in the wintertime when we see them most frequently. Thinking of non-lethal ways to do that. Like I mentioned, making sure the environment is clean and that the rats and mice have no reason to want to come in is important. I think also the bird collision, that's another good example. So some sources like, let's see, the Lab of Ornithology has some very good examples of how to mitigate bird window collisions. And so finding
some URLs available for the audience on that.
Yep, yeah, so going directly to the source, or even, we are on the phone, we have an email, we can certainly discuss with folks if they have specific examples of concerns with animals and animal interactions with people. We do a lot of public education, and so animal interactions with humans, we want those to not end badly.
Right.
And yep.
No, perfect. Well, I think that's probably all the time we have today. So I want to thank you guys all again. I mean, you've made such important connections between everything from the individual animal that continue on up through the population level, and again, how the environment feeds back on all of that. And I really appreciate the fact that you recognize what an honor and a privilege it is to get to work with these animals, because they really are ambassadors of wild nature. And you're not just treating them, you're learning so much that can hopefully prevent some of these problems going forward. So I'm just going to ask our audience, for those of you who are interested in learning more about the work of the Swanson Wildlife Hospital and the K. Lisa Yang Center for Wildlife Health, please go to wildlife.cornell.edu. You can sign up for our free e-newsletter, which comes out every few months. You can follow us on Instagram, on X, on YouTube, and you can scan that QR code there to get more information. The more people that are aware of what we're talking about, the better it is for the future of wildlife and for all of us. So thanks again for joining us for One Health Around the World.